Hello, everyone. Sebastião Salgado, Edward Burtynsky, thank you very much for being present today online on the occasion of the exhibition by Edward Burtynsky, Mounts and Voids. I would also like to thank Catherine Bédard, co-director of the Canadian Cultural Center in Paris and curator of the show, for this invitation and for the initiative of this encounter. As many exhibitions in Paris at the moment, Mounts and Voids has been ready for a while, but it hasn't opened yet. And for the moment, there's a virtual bilingual guided tour with Edward Burtynsky and Catherine Bédard on YouTube and on Facebook on the account of the Canadian Cultural Center in Paris. And luckily, the good news is that the exhibition will be extended until September 3rd. Sebastião Salgado, Edward Burtynsky, you've had major international exhibitions in the past decades. To quote only a few recent events, Genesis in 2013 by Sebastião Salgado and Amazonia, which was shown recently last summer at the Philharmonie in Paris. And for you, Edward Burtynsky, I'd like to the Anthropocene's project, which has toured since 2018 at the National Gallery of Canada, the MAST in Bologna, the Museum of Malmö. And for the most recent works, Natural Order, which was shown at Galleries Nicolas Métivier in Toronto last fall. There are echoes between your works and obviously also some major differences, but it seems you have in common a huge concern for the future of the planet and the preservation of nature. And this is one of the subjects I'd like to discuss today, how photography can play a role in such commitments. To begin with, Sebastião Salgado, you sometimes said that you photographed with the skies of your childhood. And Edward Burtynsky, you also grew up in a country, Canada, with vast landscapes and open skies. I'd like to know where and when you became aware of those ecological stakes that are present in your works. Did it come from your childhood? Was it progressive? Was there one event that made you aware? Maybe Sebastião Salgado, you could start on this point.
You see, I were not an activist in ecology, and work in Africa, doing a quite large body of work about migration. I had very hard times working in Rwanda, the genocide in the former Yugoslavia, and that made me sick. I became sick. And in a moment, I take a decision to abandon photography. We went back with Lélia to Brazil. My father's mother were become old. They gave us the farm, and I supposed to become a farmer. Arriving there, we discover land very tired, very eroded. And my wife Lélia had an idea, said, Sebastián, in place to have a cattle farm here, why we do not replant the forest that was here before? And I said, why not? I believe that's 10 times more interesting and better. And we started to replant a forest, but a big forest to recuperate, to rehabilitate this area. It was necessary to us to plant about 3 million trees. And we start. Today we have the 3 million trees in the ground. And between that moment and now, we became not real activists, but we put our body, our heart inside the fighting for the environment. And we create one of the biggest schools of environment in Brazil. We created probably the biggest nursery for native plants in Brazil. And we are working now in the recuperation of water system of a valley as big as Portugal, planting thousands of sources of water. And you see, I don't know what moment we cross from one point to the other, but we went to plant probably a big garden that will be this farm will become a national park, what it is now, and to the moment that we went inside the activism of ecology. It's there that born this project that you just spoke now, Genesis. From there, I take a decision to go back to photography, but in this moment, to photograph what was pristine in this planet. And my life changed a little bit from this moment.
Edward?
Yeah, and that's a beautiful story, Sebastião. I'm always so impressed when I hear what you've done with your family farm. It should be lauded as the way to deal with a problem, and that if every human being reacted in a positive way like that, we wouldn't have the problems we face today. In my own story, it began quite early in my life, in that I was always brought out into nature. My father was loved going out fishing. We would in the fall go looking for mushrooms. He came from the Ukraine, so he lived in the Carpathian Mountains, so he was an outdoors person, and I definitely got my love of the outdoors from him. And he died when I was young. I was 15 when he passed away, and then as soon as I was able to get a car the following year, when I was 16, I got a car and put a canoe on top of it and started to really canoe and hike the wilderness in northern Ontario. And that was really the beginning of my true appreciation for, what is meant to be on the planet. What was there before we come along? And in Canada, we have an abundance of nature, and we have a fairly small population. And yes, there's been a lot of deforestation, but there still is a lot of what was meant to be there. And I think when you're able to be, and I didn't understand that as a younger person, I didn't understand what I was looking at. But as I got older, I understood the fascination is that I am sort of looking at deep time. That this place, this is much as it looked like, 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, that I'm looking at something that is enduring, something that is kind of there, and what is the life that's meant to be on there before we reshape it. And I think without the understanding of what that natural place is, I could never create the body of work that I did, because at the core of everything that I'm looking at is that in our success, there is a punishment of nature, that nature is being suppressed and pushed back. So biodiversity, that natural fabric, is being shredded as we, as our populations grow. And to appreciate that there is a finite amount of that diversity is to understand that we need to preserve it. We need to fight for it, because by losing that biodiversity, we are actually threatening all life, including our own, on the planet. So to me, that there's a great existential threat when you see the human footprint going deeper and deeper, both for resources and for infrastructure and for cities. As we go deeper and there's less room for the natural world, we start to tip the complete balance of the planet, which is at no other time in the human experiment have we ever faced such a existential threat.
It's great to have you gathered here, the two of you. I was wondering if you have a memory of when you first saw images from each other. Edward, do you remember when you first saw Sebastian's work?
Well, the miners in Brazil was the first thing that kind of caught my eyes, and I saw that, you know, many years ago. Soon after it came out, I was absolutely fascinated with that. In that, those images felt like they came from another era, from another time. That they were biblical almost. That this is, you know, maybe, you know, during the time of slavery in Egypt or something. It just somehow did not feel like it was possible that these places, this event, this type of mining was occurring in this day and this age. And of course, Sebastião's ability to get in there with a 35 millimeter camera and the way he treats his black and white work is, I think those images have, you know, seared themselves into almost the consciousness of most of the planet in terms of a body of work that somehow, you know, was a revelation. So, of course, and then the oil works in Kuwait and the workers in Kuwait and the you know, that moment where the earth became this surreal, otherworldly, black, smudged, you know, place. Again, those images were, you know, telegraphed around the world, and I think people really began to understand what happened there through Sebastião's, you know, incredible abilities.
And Sebastián, do you remember when Ed's work caught your attention?
Yes. The first images Ed were in the shipbreakers in Chittagong in Bangladesh. And what's amazing for me, the pictures of Ed, that we had about the same interest in the same subjects, but made in a completely different way. I love the way that Ed photographs. He's a fabulous photographer. And his photography is close to the perfect shot. And I went there also. Mine are not. Mine are another part of the same universe that he saw. In this picture, me, I were much more close to the subject, to the shoot. And he had a view more wide of the subjects that I worked so close of them. And all the works of Ed, of the landscape. After that, I started to discover this photographer, and I started to see his work. And with my wife, Lélia, we love very much. Still the day that you had the opportunity to meet with them. What's amazing, because we met and we became friends immediately. And was every moment of every time that we have opportunity, we are together. When I come to Canada, I live in his home. No, he came to our home in Bali, and we are so close in the what we photograph. We are so close in the life. We are so close to the environment. Our preoccupation. We are not two different ones to the
To come back to the exhibition in Paris, its main subject is extraction from Earth in various senses, mostly of raw material from sapphire to petroleum. And it makes us travel around the world from Madagascar to South Africa, Canada, Italy, Bangladesh, as you said, Sebastián. Both your works are extremely based on traveling. I was wondering how you prepare those travels that you do, and if you know how much you know in advance what exactly you're looking for. Maybe, Ed, you could start on this point.
Yeah, so generally speaking, there's a lot of research, and I work with different people in the research as well. So I do my own, but I also have assistance in going deeper into the areas. And then once we decide on areas that I want to photograph, then becomes letter writing, phone calling, being able to find access into those places. Most of the places I go, are, especially when I'm on the ground, I have to have permission, whether it's a mine or a quarry or an area where logging is occurring. Companies are usually running these operations, and you need to get permission from the top because it's a fairly high-profile approach to it. And it does take, I would say, generally speaking, when I'm shooting, I kind of know the subject that I'm going after. I know, and at the very beginning, it was more exploratory. I mean, 1983, I got in my car and drove for 4 months and just went to areas where I knew mining was happening. And then I knocked on their doors and showed them some pictures and talked to the general manager and found my way in slowly. But as I, became more sophisticated in my approach, I would then get all the preparation and the permissions before I land. And then I would land with my crew, with 2 or 3, sometimes 4 people. If it's film, it's many more. And then I would just, again, begin to work. So it would take me about, I always found about a month of per 1 week of shooting. So if I was going to go shoot for 3 weeks, it's usually, a full-on 3 to 4 months of preparation, getting flights, getting permissions, getting access, deciding what the subject is, and all of that. So it has changed a lot, and that there's less of chance. And then, of course, when I do get there, you always see something that you never expected, and there is always discovery once you arrive. So I have ideas in my head, and then I'm open to seeing what the potential is when I go there, as I think most photographers would, because you can only anticipate so much. Never been to a place, and then you have to then use your own experience and the things that you've come across before and the approaches you've taken before. And the thing about being at it for many years, like Sebastião and myself, I think the best thing that we learn over time is the wisdom of what pictures not to take, that you spend most times working on the ones that have the greatest chance of success. And you don't have to make those ones that don't work anymore because you said, no, I won't take that one. It doesn't work. So there is something about being at it for a long time that prepares you to have fewer mistakes and a higher probability of success.
Sebastián, would you say in those travel, it's important to make visible those parts of the world which are, for most people, really invisible?
You see, a photographer knows where he goes. As Ed said, we take a long time preparing the trips. Me, for example, I just finished a shoot in Amazonia that it took me about 7 years to do it. Sometimes I put 1 year to prepare one shoot in Amazonia. And you know where to go, the month to go, but we don't know what you bring from that. Will be always a huge surprise. And what's the difference between the video, the films, that the films, the videos, they write these guidelines, and when they leave Paris, when they leave Toronto, they know what they'll be bringing back. But photographers know. We know where we go, but we don't know really what will be captured, be taken. We have an incredible mudding of aleatory expectation. And you see, I spent a long time in my life out of my home. About all my life long, the stories that I did never happen in front of the door of my home. And the point was this: I never did a short-term story. I did very few stories, but composed by addition of small stories that made a big one. That now, for example, in Amazonia, I worked with 12 different tribes. I did more than 30 trips, flying or by boats or by walk inside Amazonia, and to get my pictures was long shooting, long time. And I knew that we'd be having these pictures of Amazonia. But for me, what I have now has nothing to do what I imagined that we'd be having in the beginning. No, is a collection of the reality. The photographers walk in the cross sections of the reality. They don't walk in a continuity of a reality. They photograph what they found. And sometimes their point of view change a lot when they arrive to meet the subject, the story that will be photographed.
You are starting to speak about those points of views that you have and which are quite different. Edward, your images are often taken from helicopters or drones or even cranes. What are you looking for in those aerial views? What do those almost impossible point of views mean for you?
Well, there's a combination of things that are happening. One is from the very beginning, what I wanted to do with my photography is unlike Sebastião, who works with a 35, which is very spontaneous. So you can go in there and find this elusive moment of some kind of human moment or touching moment. Whereas I'm shooting with a large format camera, which is a big distinction. So I have to have a tripod. I look at a ground glass with my image upside down, and I shoot with 8x10 negatives, which at the time were, it was very expensive to work with. So you don't shoot a lot. You shoot very few. So with that kind of concentration, what I was looking at is trying to bring together the things that I loved in art history, the kind of abstract expressionist aesthetic, the gesture and color and the flattening of space and the all overness and where there isn't a singular central subject. It's the whole canvas, so to speak. I was looking at photography as a canvas, so that everything in there somehow belongs. That it feels like it should have always been a picture, whereas when I first went to a tire pile, or I first went to a refinery, or I first went to wherever, it's not your normal place that you think an image that, of interest, of a sense of wonder could actually be there. So for me, it was always like unlocking the ability to find that moment, and that compression of space and always getting higher allows a middle ground to open up. So it's a much more interesting point of view. And if you want to try to explain or show visually our impact and the scale of our impact on the planet, is very hard from a position of 6 feet, where you stand. If you stand in front of a field, a farm field, you see the first bit of corn in front of you, but you don't see how big that field is. But if you get up and you get above it, you can start seeing the scale of how we're transforming the planet. And to me, that's always been the interesting thing, is to take that large form, marry it up with the history of art and visuals that actually have a powerful way to connect with us, and then go out there and show the largest scale examples of the human footprint on the planet. And so that's the kind of combination that I did. So getting up in the air, I was able to show the scale of what a large copper mine is, the scale of what a large iron ore mine is. And so that was, to me, the fascination of going, with a helicopter or with a plane to photograph these things.
In the exhibition in Paris, there's an extremely large format of artisanal mine in Madagascar, which is printed on a vinyl on the wall. And the impression it produces is that obviously it's very immersive, but paradoxically, I had the feeling that it brings a kind of abstraction also to this image.
Yeah, actually, surprisingly, you've seen that image on the wall and I haven't. So I don't. So you've experienced something. I kind of conceptually saw it as an image, but I've never been able to. It's not something I print in my studio and stick up on a wall. So these things are meant for the museum as a destination point. But that being said, again, I've never been afraid of using technology in my work. So back in, I think I had a drone with my Hasselblad on a drone in 2010. This is before people thought of putting large, big cameras on and doing stills from high above with a drone. In that Madagascar image, again, I was able to work with a very large drone and the latest phase camera. It's 150 megapixel. But not only am I using the state-of-the-art optics and a sensor, 150 megapixel, but I can lock a drone at a distance. I find the point of view, lock it, and then do multiple images with that camera. So that's probably stitched together with 12 150 megapixel files to create a multi-gigabyte file that allows me to print a 12-foot by 25-foot image where every individual you can see in the picture, and you get this kind of surreal scale. And that's about artisanal mining, probably influenced by artisanal mining that Salgado Sebastian did many years ago in Brazil. But it's my version with a drone. There was probably several thousand people in the picture, all going about their daily business. So to me, it's a way to have something on a scale of a billboard, but you can walk up to it and put your face within a foot away from it and see every individual in the picture. And that's something that wasn't possible to do even 5 years ago. I would say it would be almost impossible to make an image that could have that ability to maintain the detail and yet have that kind of scale to it as well. And it is something that I'm interested in, is immersive experiences, and it is something that's almost incomprehensible when you stand in front of it.
Sebastian, would you say how would you define an ideal point of view?
What is ideal? No, that you see, as Ed said, when we are flying, we have another vision of the reality. Now, I just finished this body of work in Amazonia that we started to show now in April in Paris. I made a lot of aerial pictures. The Brazilian army bring with them inside of their flights. You see, Brazil, Amazonia made border with Colombia, with Venezuela, where we produce the biggest amount of drugs in the world. And these drugs now, because of the repression of United States, European countries, they don't go out in the airport, from the airports, from the harbors of these countries. They come from Amazonia. They cross Amazonia, they come inside the Brazilian rivers, and from the Brazilian rivers, they arrive in the big cities in Amazonia, and from there they go to the world. And Brazilian army has a huge amount of headquarters inside Amazonia to control all this traffic of drugs. And I applied to fly with them because it was necessary to me to have a vision other than the Amazonia, then this line, sit in a boat, because you travel by boat in Amazonia, with a forest and the sky, that's it. It was necessary to me to see beyond this. And they asked me to bring me with them. I went on more than 30 different missions, more with them. They accepted that I fly with them with the doors of the big helicopters completely open. They tied me in the helicopter and was supposed to me to make these pictures. And I had a lot of ideal pictures in my mind, but I never find them. You see, you are open. I bring amazing pictures. I must say to you that it's amazing what I saw. I bring, for example, I can now materialize in picture a new concept about the aerial rivers from Amazonia that you hear to speak, but we don't know pictures. I photograph them. I have pictures of them. I was not expecting to have them. And I have the pictures of the mountains of Amazonia that no one knows. Amazonia has more mountains than the Alps. The big chains of mountains of Brazil, they are not in the south of Brazil, they are in Amazonia. And I bring pictures of all this in this new body of work. But in reality, I was not expecting these things, you know. And for me, the ideal shot is very difficult to conceive it before. It happens not in a fraction of a second, happens in a phenomenon that started to raise in front of you, and you arrive on it. It's there, and you get the picture, and you have it. And sometimes you don't have. You spend 2-3 days looking, find, and this. No, it is very special. I live with these Indian communities for months. One trip, for example, to go to see a tribe will take me at least 2 weeks to reach the tribe, because plus the long trip in the river is necessary to do one quarantine before to reach the tribe, the antibodies that we have a possibility to bring diseases from the outside of the forest, and the Indians have not antibodies to protect themselves against these diseases. And after that was 2-3 months for one tribe living with that. That become your home. Sometimes nothing happens for 2-3 days, and sometimes in 2 hours you have a mason of pictures. And the only thing that exists in photography, you need to have your time. You need, is your dog?
Yes, it is.
You need to wait. You need to give time to time, no? And you need time. In my case, I know when I go. I don't know when I come out. I bring with me one satellite phone that every 2 days I call my wife Lelia, I speak to her, I give a position where I am and the things, and that's it. I organize one expedition. I bring with me anthropologists, translators. I bring guys that know very well how to operate boats. The guys that what we call in Brazil captain of the jungle is the guy that understands the jungle as the line of their hand, that can set a camp, and that we can organize and to travel with the Indians 2-3 days, 1 week inside the jungle to go to the hunting encampment, fishing encampment. But what's the idea? The idea would be one anyway would be happens, but we don't know when.
I'd like now to come to the question of color, which separates you. Obviously, Edward, your pictures are very well known for their extremely attractive colors. How do you work them? Do you rework them? How do you conceive this use of color?
Well, I did start my whole career in photography in black and white. So I never shot color for the first 12 years of photography. I loved black and white, both large format and 35 and even 120 cameras. And then it was probably in 1980 when I finally made the jump. And I was taking a course in color photography in large format. And it was mostly at that time in the 80s considered a medium for commercial purposes, shooting large format, whether it's cars or perfume bottles or, bottles of wine or scotch or something like that. So it was always used high-end advertising. And there were very few. I mean, Stephen Shore was one, and Joe Meyerowitz was another one. There was, Elliot Porter. There were 3 or 4 artists at the time when I was picking up the camera that were using color. And my very early images were almost black and white with a little bit of color. The Railcut series was one of my very first successful series, and it was very monochromatic and very, very subtle use of color. And I think that was also, a carryover of liking to work in that tonal range. I was saying about composition, and I don't know if you agree with this, and back to our earlier conversation, Sebastião, but I feel a composition, when students ask me, I say, well, it's like being a safe cracker. The prize is inside the safe, but you don't know what the numbers are, and you have to feel the tumbles drop, and whether it's the light and the subject and the texture of it, and all those things have to align, and then the picture drops into place. And you can't actually predict when all those tumblers drop. They have to feel them, and when they're all there, the image has a greater chance of occurring. And I often feel it's like that kind of subtle, when you're in the field, the ability to be aware of everything, to know when and where the photograph may occur. but going back to color, that's also part of it. Is that, you know, what season am I in? So there's certain seasons I don't like to shoot in the summer where everything's green. I mean, green represents better in black and white, but if you went to Amazonia and photographed it with color, I think you just get overwhelmed with the green and you stop really seeing the texture of the place. You just see green, and so you have to be really aware of how you use color, where it's used, and I liked color in that it's just, you know, it's one step closer to the way we see the world. And I don't really change much. What I will do in my post-production in color is I will add more contrast. Oftentimes, especially with aerial work, you know, you get a little atmospheric haze, or when you're trying to shoot in China, for sure, it's almost impossible to shoot in China without haze. So often I'll take some of that haze. I won't work it all the way back, but I will work a lot of that haze back using contrast control. So that's something that I wasn't able to do before digital. So when Photoshop came along, I was able to do that. Before that, if it was hazy and I shot it on color negative film and I had an enlarger, that's the way it looked. I could not do anything about it. If I had a chance to do something about it, I probably would have, but those tools weren't there at the time. So these new tools really do allow me to get the contrast and the density and local, like general small areas where the color's off a bit because the lens is, I'm using the edge of the lens and it's a little bluer than it should be. I can adjust that, whereas before it was almost impossible. So the new tools have certainly allowed me to have more control over the whole print.
And Sebastian, how do you react to that, having made the decision the other way around from color to black and white? Would you say black and white is a way to look at the world from closer?
You see, in the beginning, when I start photography, I work a lot for agents. I work for Sigma, for Gamma, Magnum. I spent 15 years in Magnum. And we work in these agents for magazines. And I had a lot of color assignment. Most of the pictures that I made were color pictures, not black and white, because it would be impossible to me to survive. Of course, that I had a camera with me. I photograph in color, but also in black and white. And from the beginning, color for me was a problem. I love color pictures. Add color pics for me are fabulous. But for me, it was impossible. Because for two reasons. The first reason that I work in stories. And in that time, we photograph with slides. The camera had these slides. And when you finish the shooting, you put your lights in the light table. You take that picture is good, that is good. You take them out. You had a break. You complete your sequence. And when I have my contact sheets, all my pictures were there. Looking to them, always I had my sequence. In working color, I had no more sequence and I had no more story. For me, it was a drama. The second point was when I was shooting in color, when I saw reds, greens, blues, these strong colors, I was 100% sure that in these lights, all these colors, we have an amazing importance. People will be looking at them before. And that completely breaks my concentration in what to photograph. And when I was photographing black and white, nothing is in black and white. Black and white is an abstraction. But in this abstraction was possible to be to transform all the colors in grays. The blue would be gray, the red would be gray, the gray would be gray, and that was fabulous for me. I went inside this abstraction. In this moment, it was possible to me to concentrate in the subjects that I was photographing. And us, my main subject was to photograph us, the human beings. It was possible to me to concentrate in the dignity of the person, the personality of the person, to be close to the ideas. And for me, it was 100 times more easy to photograph in black and white than color. But I shoot a lot in color. The last color story that I did was for Life magazine in 1987, the commemoration of the 7th anniversary of the Soviet revolution in Moscow. That was the last shooting. After that, no more photography in color for me was forced to me to concentrate on in my black and white.
Struck by the fact that in the exhibition, Edward, you made experiments with augmented reality, and you introduced augmented reality in your photography. And Sebastian, even when you decided to introduce a digital aspect of your technique in your photography, a digital technique in your photography, you kept an analogical method, I would say. What could you elaborate on this? What were you looking for, Edward, when you decided to explore augmented reality in those images?
Well, what I said earlier is I really, I've never been afraid of technology. In fact, in 1985, I started a photo lab called Toronto Imageworks in Toronto, and that produces all my work. And it's still functioning. And I always have to be at the very vanguard or forefront of technological changes in photography, in color and film and all of that. So I was always, the first one to get that new color film from Kodak or Agfa or whatever, and I would try it out and see what qualities it had. And I was always looking at optics, and so I was always interested in it because there is a lot of technology in photography. It's the tools of optics and the sensors and the films and all of that were the things that ultimately give you the experience that you see on the wall. So to be a master of that, you need to fully understand how all these things work. And the biggest paradigm shift, then transformation of the medium, was when it went from optical chemical process, which had been for almost a century and a half, and went digital. And now your image is ones and zeros. It's reduced to ones and zeros and can be transferred via the internet to others. We're currently experiencing having this discussion, from Canada to Europe through the digitization of images. So it was a huge shift in terms of the ability for images to go and migrate. And then something happened where all of a sudden I recognized that there is this new technique called photogrammetry, where you can take a digital, native digital image, take hundreds of pictures or even thousands of pictures of an object, put it into software, and now you'll have a very, very realistic, true to dimension and true to color and true to texture image of something in the world. And so now photography's entered in color into the third dimension. And I started working with that over 5 years ago. And so the exhibition in Paris at the Canadian Cultural Center, I have two new pieces. One is one of the largest engines ever built. It's a 4,800 horsepower engine that is about, I think it was almost, over 2 meters high, 2.5 meters high. And it is the large engine that moves a generator that then produces electricity to go to the four wheels to drive one of the biggest vehicles to move ore in mines. This machine can move 400 tons of ore at once. And so these trucks are enormous. They're the size of a house. But here was an engine in there sitting being worked on, and I thought, how do you bring this? Because as far as I have understood the world and the things that I've done is it's technology that has allowed our populations to swell. It's the ability to gather the materials from nature, whether it's copper or iron. It's the ability to use machines to produce, in the prairies, to produce wheat, to feed, almost 8 billion people. So without the internal combustion engine, we couldn't be at this place. So it's technology and invention that's got us, into this kind of population growth, and of course a plentiful source of fuel through ancient oil. So to me, I wanted to have a museum experience where you can walk around and see this thing that we built that allows us to have the kind of life that we have, to build a car for the price that we can, because we can move this material out of nature so efficiently and effectively with these new tools, with a machine, with a motor that large. So to me, it's always referencing back to how technology is and how the internal combustion engine is at the core of who we are and how we've arrived at this point in time.
Why are humans so absent of your images, or when they're present, why are they so abstractly shown, almost like commas, like little colored commas?
Well, to me, all my work stands as a lament for the loss of biodiversity and the loss of nature, that we are in the theater of our own making, that humans, so I want the humans to be in that theater of the making, that they are dwarfed in their own world of making. And to me, that was always the metaphor, that the new sublime that we are experiencing today isn't the sublime of old, of Turner's sublime, where nature was omnipresent and we were dwarfed by its forces and diminished by its forces and sitting in awe of its forces. Today, we're in the technological sublime, where we are in the forces of our own making, of our own metropolises, of our own huge open pit mines, our deforestation at levels that were unimaginable, 2 centuries ago. So I think, to me, that is what I'm interested in, is our relationship to the planet and to nature, and that's at the core of everything I'm doing. So we are just players in a larger theater of our own making.
And Sebastian, your concerns seem to go the same direction, but human dimension and even the relationship that you create with the people that you photograph seem to be part of your way of expressing this message, right? What importance do you give to human presence in your images, and to not only to human presence, but to the relationship that you create with your models?
Well, you see, doing human photography, you must have a very strong relation with the group that you are working with them. You cannot do stories that you are not comfortable to do them, that are your stories. I did a huge story during many years about refugees, about migrants. I was a refugee for many years in France. Till now, I am a migrant. And that was my story. I stayed in the road during 7 years doing this because that was my home. I did a large story about the end of the first big industrial revolution that we create a quite a big book called Workers. I'm a former economist and I'm a former Marxist. And for me, the workers were the most important variable in the model of the production, the system of production. And I went to do a story about workers in the end of the first big industrial revolution. And you see, but I did stories that were my stories. Now I'm just finished a story in Amazonia. I'm so concerned about Amazonia, about the destruction of the forest, about the survival of this tribe in Amazonia. The tribes in Amazonia are probably the biggest concentration of cultures in the planet. We have more than 180 different languages. We have more than 300 different cultures inside the Amazonia. We must work, protect all these. And I went to that work. I just spent 7 years in Amazonia with a huge pleasure to be there. And when you go to do stories, because are your stories, you are perfect there. you are well with the people that you are photographing, and that become your home, that become your friends, that become your family. In reality, the pictures that you capture, it's not you really that take all them. The people give them to you. They accept you, you become part of their life, their way of life. And that's become very easy. I hear Ed speaking about technology. I don't know how to switch on a computer, but I work with very sophisticated cameras. To photograph in Amazonia, for me, was the biggest difficult problem was to have films with high sensibility, but high sensibility of film was 400 SA. In running back to the Indians under the Amazonian forest that is very dark, the sun comes very few sun down, the speed of shooting was very low, very slow. And 90% of my pictures was losing. And I work with the guys of Canon, and I added them to develop probably the most sophisticated 35mm cameras ever made. Is the Canon 1DX. And but this camera is a fabulous computer. But the guys gave me the camera. I photograph and I say, guys, I have a huge problem to make my focus in the very dark position. They added some technology inside, some calculators inside. That became very easy for me to do this. And I had problems here, there. They know what they did, and they produced a fabulous camera that I went to Amazonia, and it was possible to me to run it back to the Indians when they are hunting, when they are fishing, and photograph with a very comfortable speed, sometimes very grainy, because it was necessary, but I jumped for 400 SA to 5,000 SA. That for me was the paradise. It was fantastic. But they programmed my camera from the beginning in Paris. The technician programmed my camera, and I gone. And all the programmation was inside one of these small memory cards. When I had some problem, I put inside memory card, and the memory card reprogrammed my camera, and I continue to photograph. I photograph black and white with a digital camera, but I don't know how to edit in a screen of a computer. My assistant made for me contact sheets like we did all my life long, and with a loop, I edit every frame. And when I made my final choice, in this moment, we produce a negative, a 4x5-inch negative, and we print from negatives again. That means I continue in the same technology that I have before with my films from the beginning, but use another technology. But in place to register my pictures in a plastic support that were the films, now I register in a digital support. But the result is about the same, and the way to work is about the same. The only difference that's 10 times more easy. The big problem that I have with films was after the 11th September, the security in the airports became the hell. To cross with the film, the X-ray machines, they destroy the films. And today, I can carry all my films in a very small box with all my memory cards inside. And that's it. I'm the doors of the paradise. That's fantastic.
As we are coming to an end of this discussion, as a conclusion, I would like to ask you if you consider, I would like to ask you about the impact that art can have on politics, and if you consider your commitment with Instituto Terra and with the Anthropocene project, which is extremely involved in education, as extensions of your artistic practices, or if you see them, both those activities are as separated projects.
Well, I'll start. In many ways, I think art is like subliminal activism. It's it reveals versus, I'll often say it's rather than be accusatory, you become revelatory. You reveal things with a camera. And we, all live in worlds where most of us live in cities now, and we have circuits of our work, our place where we go to buy our food, we come home, and sometimes we go on vacation or travel for work or whatever. But by and large, we have a limited kind of range of what we see. And the as artists and with lens and both film and photography, we're able to go into that world and kind of maybe reconnect people to those other worlds that Robert Smithson said we need to, in a way, embrace our wastelands, that these wastelands are not what they are meant, that this is still part of our world. We've created this world. We leave it for dead, but there's still, trees will come back there. Animals will start to reemerge in that area. These things will be taken back by nature eventually over time. But we need to kind of think about the worlds that we're creating. And I think as artists, quite frankly, science, engineering are not the best storytellers, and that's where the humanities are important. The artists, the writers, the filmmakers, the theaters, and the playwrights, and they are able to take the human condition in all of its different facets and be able to mediate it back into the world, to be able to broadcast it back into the world in a way that touches us and makes us think about who we are and reflect upon it. And I think that the role of the artist is to find ways in which they can bring meaning back into the world and show people who are often involved in very important work and producing our food or creating new technologies or building our cities. But then artists are the ones that go out there and find the stories and find the images and find the ways in which we can somehow illustrate the great human experiment.
And Sebastian, would you like to conclude?
Well, see, photography brings me to the environment. I tell you a few minutes ago about the drama that I suffer in these shootings in Africa. Is to take a decision to abandon photography, that we went and we started to replant a forest. And walking there, the nature, the soil, the trees, all the return of the life made me happy again, and this sent me back to photography. And I went to do a story all over the world to see another planet. You see, we do photography because we love. Photography is not, you do photography not because you want to be an artist, not you want to be a photo reporter, nothing of this. Photography is a way of life, it's your full life. And, but when I look what we built with photography, Instituto Terra today is the biggest environmental institution in Brazil. We employ more than 120 people. We are planting millions of trees. And when I look to this, it's amazing. When I look the size of my cameras, I look the size of a tree. I remember a few years ago, Leica, when I was working Leica at the beginning of Instituto Terra, Leica always gave the closed series number for someone. They gave, I believe, the 500,000 Leica to Queen Elizabeth. They gave 1 million Leica to Nehru. They gave 1.5 million Leica to Cartier-Bresson. They gave me the 3 million Leica. I said, what I do with a camera like this? And like a guy said, Sebastian, we can add you to sell this camera in an auction. That can make a lot of money in a collectors. And I say, guys, we go ahead, we sell this camera in auction. And they sell my camera for about 150,000 euros. We get this money, say, we sell this camera to plant the trees. And we get this money, we went there, we plant about 50,000 trees with one Leica. When you see the size of the light, is this, no bigger than this, no larger than this. And these 50,000 trees, in 20 years, they will be each tree big like this, large like this, 40 meters high. And when I put my light in front of the 50,000 trees, it's just nothing. You see, but it's the light that built these trees, that made us construct. You see, it's different. There is no connection because your mind and the things that you do in the life. You see, you do photography because you like. We come to ecology because photography brings you. And your life evolves, you do things, and one thing linked to the other. Other people come linked to you. And you see, this relation between one reason, something that happened, that don't exist. It's an addition to life that come together in a flow. That's your model of the life, is the model of the life of many people around you that put you together and become another thing. You go to another thing.
Thank you very much for this conversation. Sebastião Salgado and Edward Burtynsky. I would like to now invite our listeners to go to the Paris Canadian Cultural Center as soon as it reopens. And I wish that moment will come soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sebastião.
Thank you, Ed.